All right. So we are moving along through Mishnah. We are now in chapter 2, and we're going to be hitting Mishnah 3 this evening. But in order to do this, we have to come to an understanding of a very important halachic term that is clunky in English, but it's even more idiomatic in Hebrew. And we're gonna need to unpack this. So we all know that there are these things called commandments, right? There are these things called mitzvot that we are supposed to fulfill, that we are supposed to do. What do you say when someone has done a mitzvah? What verb do you use?
Is that Yasher Koach?
No, not what do you say to a person.
Oh, I see.
Right? If you want to say this guy, okay, that guy, not. How do you say that in English? Perform, right? You've performed a mitzvah, right? You've performed a mitzvah. You've done a mitzvah, right? You've acted a mitzvah, right? It's a basically what you're saying is you started here, right? And you're now here because of the mitzvah, right? You have added to your activity by doing the mitzvah. You have added to your life by doing the mitzvah, right? It's an additive process. And if you do another mitzvah, then you're here. And you do another mitzvah, you're here. We have this sort of subliminal image of mitzvot tallies that go up and up and up. The word that's used in Hebrew is yotze, which I don't know if any of the Hebrew mavens here. Yotze means to exit, right? It means to leave, to exit. We talk about Yetziat Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt, right? It's the going out. And the term that's used in Hebrew is that you are yotze. You have gone out from your mitzvah. You have exited your mitzvah. You've exited your mitzvah? The best translation, or ish, is you have discharged your obligation. Because the concept that the rabbis use for understanding mitzvot, which I think is very transformative once you internalize it, is you start here. And you need to get up to point 0 by doing your mitzvah. Once you've done your mitzvah, then you have leveled it off. You've cleared the account books. You're zeroed, right? You start off in the red. You don't start at 0. You start in the red. You start in a debt situation. And indeed, the term is used that you are chayav, right? You are obligated. You are indebted to do the mitzvah. You are born with obligation, right? You are born having to pay back God for the gift of life, for the gift of the world around us, for the gift of being a Jew, of having Torah. And we pay off that debt every day by the performance of mitzvot. Some of them are day by day. We're talking about the Shema. And so that's a day by day mitzvah that every day the account gets set back to, you are minus two recitations of the Shema. And once you've done 1 and then you've done 2, bing, you're back up to 0. You've got the account level and you're good for the day when it comes to the Shema. And then the next morning, ting, you're back at minus 2 recitations of the Shema. You do 1, you do 2, bing, you've cleared the ledger. And then the next day, ting, you start off again and again and again in the hole. You start off in debt, right? We're not born in sin, but we are born in debt. And actually, that's becoming more and more of a truism for many Americans. In this particular case, we are born with an expectation. We are born with obligation. We are born with responsibility. And these are all words: expectation, responsibility, obligation. They make modern people kind of uncomfortable, right? Because we like the image that we start off neutral. And that every day, if we do a little good, we've done a little good. And if we do a little more, we've done a little more. But no one can really fault us for not doing good as long as we're not doing bad. That's not the visualization of the sages. The sages of the Mishnah very much say, no, you are born with obligations. You are born with responsibilities and expectations. And you either live up to them, yay, and then exceed them, really yasher koach, yay, that's when we start saying super praiseworthy things, or you fail to meet them. And if you fail to meet them, we're going to call it what it is, that you missed the mark, you failed. Right? And next day, ding, you get to try again. But it's not like, well, you didn't do any bad today, so it's all okay. It's no, you missed the opportunity to live up to your expectation and obligation. So you have to bear that in mind when we're reading this section, because we're going to be talking about discharging our obligation, being yotze, of going out of our mitzvah, of fulfilling the mitzvah, for the recitation of the Shema, and all the ways that you can go wrong or miss the mark in that performance. Make sense? Maybe? That little introduction got us grounded. Are we all terrified now?
Yes.
Oh my God, what am I supposed to be doing? But again, in the image of our faith, we are born with these expectations. So we can put our hands over our ears and go, la, 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 I can't hear you, or not, but they're there. This is part of our life, and it is a beautiful thing. And there are many, many teachings about the wondrous gift we have of being born with an obligation and expectation that isn't there if everything was just free to choose whatever you felt like. That being born with an expectation of us may seem more demanding and grueling, but it's also more ennobling, because it lifts us in every possible corner of our spirit rather than just where we feel like it. Because if you just say, I'll do what I feel like and whatever I do is good enough, then you're only moving and lifting your spirit in the corners that are comfortable for you and that you find are nice. And that doesn't move you so well, that doesn't move society so well. You have to look and say, I may not feel like it. Getting up early enough on a vacation day to say the Shema as we talked about before that fourth hour has gone by, but I'm going to do it because it's expected of me. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And that can be, when you fully internalize it, not a depressing idea, but a very ennobling one. So hopefully everyone has a copy. If not, we've got copies right there in front of you, Daniel, and a few more around the page. It's going to say Berachot and chapter 2, and then depending upon what page you're on, you're going to want to find Mishnah 3, which is the second page, front side. Berachot, chapter 2, Mishnah 3. So flip a page, you're on track. How we doing around? We got copies everywhere? Yay, nay, maybe? Okay. Okay, so we talked about the Shema from the Mishnah earlier for the last couple sessions, and we say that there's an evening Shema and that there's a morning Shema. We've talked about the time windows that you have for saying it and all of those good things. We talked about what breaks there are. We talked about what blessings go along with it. Now we're going to talk about actually doing it. Right? What does it mean to say the Shema? Because it's got a good beat, but can you dance to it? So now we get down to when the words leave your lips. If they have to leave your lips, what counts as, I just erased it, what counts as moving you from having fulfilled it to fulfilled it? Make sense? Good. I need a volunteer.
To do what?
To read.
Oh,
Okay. All right, so we're on Berachot, chapter 2, Mishnah 3, where it says Mishnah 3. Right?
the introduction is our Mishnah.
You can skip the introduction.
Okay.
And the explanation is for everyone's own study as well, although I'll refer to a few things from time to time, as well as other commentary. But the core is, the word says Mishnah 3, that middle section with the numbers.
First one is, one who recites the Shema without causing it to be heard by his own ear, he has fulfilled his obligation, but Rabbi Yossi says he has not fulfilled his obligation.
Okay, what does it mean to recite the Shema and you don't hear it with your own ear?
Well, if you sort of whisper it so that you can hear it, if you whisper so that you can hear it, but nobody else next to you can. But if you just say it in your mind without something, just very silent, you wouldn't.
Okay, so we've got, and again, as always, pardon for my art. We've got, right? Okay, yeah, all right. Daniel, would you mind drawing for? All right. So you've got Mr. Guy, he's out there, you know, he or she is praying, and there are three ways, essentially, that you can create the words of the Shema. You can either create them so loud that Mr. Frank over here, who has very big ears, right? He hears you quite clearly, right? Shema Yisrael. Everyone in the room hears you saying the Shema, right? It's hitting him, no problem. Or maybe you say the Shema, and the sound comes out, but it only gets that far. Shema. You can maybe hear me saying it because we're in a kind of a quiet room, but probably not so well. And not if you put your head up against me, but it's in usual human spacing. I can hear me, but you can't hear me. And then, of course, there is the just in your mind, right? My lips aren't moving at all. No air is moving through my my vocal system. I'm just there. I said the Shema, right? What are we talking about in this Mishnah? Which of the options? We'll call this A, B, and C, right?
B.
Which one's which?
They're saying you need to do B, where you hear it in your own ear, but you can't just say it in your head.
Okay, so that would be which one?
B.
Okay, so the first part of the Mishnah, right, where it says one who recites da 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 da, is talking about.
It says without causing it.
Sorry.
To be heard by his own ear.
Oh, without, that's right. Oh, you're right. Without causing it.
You're absolutely right, and I
Yeah.
need to point out
Goes
that
the other
there's
way.
actually one other option, which we'll call D, which is I say it so quietly, even I can't hear it. Right? That wasn't the Shema being recited. And then there's only mentally. And thank you for catching me in my D mistake. It sounds like they're talking about D or A. Right? No one else can hear it, but I can. But the question is, do I hear what I'm saying when I'm in my mind? Does that count as hearing? Because after all, what is the first word of the Shema?
Ear.
Listen, Shema, listen up. And so ultimately what Jewish law comes down and interpreting this is to say that they're talking about D, which is to mean your lips have moved, your tongue has formed the sounds, air went through your windpipe, but it was so sub-audible that it didn't even reach up to your ears, right? It would be like mouthing the words with just a hint of a whisper of air coming past it. Now, I know those words because I can hear them in my ear inside, but if I were to have had a tape recorder at my ear, not enough sound would have reached it for it to count. And they're wondering, the argument here is, does that count? Right? If I can't hear my own words, but I did say them, because they do, in many other places in the Mishnah, make it clear that to recite or say something means it has to pass the lips, not just the mind. And if I don't reach my ears, did I really do it? And the sages say, yes, you are Yotze. You have fulfilled your obligation. But Rabbi Yossi, not Yotze, but Rabbi Yossi says, no, it's got to be B or nothing. If you don't hear it, you didn't Shema it, and therefore it doesn't count for the Shema. Ultimately, Jewish law comes down on the side of D. They recommend B, and by the way, actively discourage disruptive C. That you should not be so loud that the other person can't hear his or her own Shema. But ultimately, B is the recommended activity, but D is the minimum requirement. For those of you that were here in the earlier sessions, we're seeing that in the Mishnah, there's often a lot of discussion about this is the absolute limit, but here's what we recommend. Like when we talked about the time for saying the Shema in the evening, right? You could technically go all the way till dawn of the next morning, but it's better to do it at least before midnight. You have to, right before dawn, okay, but do it this way is better. And here we see again, this is the minimum. It has to come out. But if it doesn't quite reach your ears, you're still good. You fulfilled your obligation. But you should try to be able to hear it a little bit. That would be better. Make sense? A little bit? Onward.
If he, this is number 2.
This is number 2, yes.
If he recited it without pronouncing the letters succinctly, Rabbi Yossi said he has fulfilled his obligation. But Rabbi Judah says he has not fulfilled his obligation.
All right, so yay or nay? What does this mean? I don't need to do a diagram for this one.
Can you mumble?
Can you mumble, right? You guys all know the old joke, right, of the old rabbi that gets up to heaven and he has an audience with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with the Holy One, and he comes in to see God, and God says, "Oh, Mr. Shapiro." The rabbi's like, what are you doing? He says, "Oh, I'm very sorry, Rabbi." He says, "God, he's like, "What? But that's how you've been talking to me for 60 years." Can you mumble? Does it still count if you mumble? By the way, the better way of unkaf zechut, on the side of the benefit of the doubt, those that you think are mumbling are simply pulling it back to be that it's not audible to you. It may sound mumbling to you because you're only hearing a few syllables, but if we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt, let's believe that they're reciting every single syllable clearly to their own ears, or at least their own lips, and you're just catching where it peaks above the audible level. It's not really a mumble. Some people do mumble, in fact, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt that it's just I couldn't hear it clearly. But is it okay? Let's imagine someone really has mumbled. Are they Yotze? Have they discharged their duty or not? Now, we have an argument in the text, but what would you think?
Yes.
Yes.
Speaking as a mumbler.
Speaking clearly,
you know what you're saying.
Clearly said. But you know what you're saying, but did you actually say it?
Yes.
But I thought you said you mumbled.
That's not a contradiction.
Andrew thinks he talks all the time, but he's not.
Okay. So the threshold becomes not mumbling in the sense of how easily is it to understand, or how clearly did you speak, or how nicely did you enunciate, but did you make a mistake? Right? There's a certain level of mumbling where you have blurred the words,
Blur the words together.
where it no longer becomes the words.
If you make a mistake, you got to do it again.
And moving on, exactly right. So that if you mumble to the point where the words are no longer the words, not that the words aren't said pretty, you don't have to be a Shakespearean actor and Shema Yisrael. You don't have to get those big actor tones and all of that. But if it's Shema, and no graph of the audio that's coming out of your mouth could you map the actual words of the Shema, then you didn't say the Shema. You made some noises in the place where the Shema would be recited, but you didn't actually say the Shema through your lips. You said it in your heart, and that's great, and a wonderful start, but over and over again, we're going to see that passing through the lips is an important part of turning a prayer from being a thought into an action. And as we all know, Judaism loves action more than just thoughts. And words are action, which is why we talk so much.
So even if it's not being heard by your own ear, then we're talking about like moving your mouth, even though no sound comes out.
Well, not no sound, but even sound that you can't clearly hear, yes. Now, at that point, you're right, there's a margin for error, but if the tongue isn't moving, or if the tongue is just flapping wildly, and I have seen examples of that, not out the side of the corner of their mouth, and like a dog in the pickup truck, but just you can tell sometimes that some people are not actually making syllables. They're just letting their lips move as seems befitting. It's sort of like shuckling with your mouth. Like there aren't that many M's in that word. You just going like this, it looks like talking, but there aren't that many M's. So yes, in those forms, you would not be Yotze. You would not have fulfilled your obligation. And if this seems a little harsh or strict, or come on, what does God really care? Try mumbling and muttering "I love you" to your spouse. and see how well that goes over, especially if it becomes a consistent way of articulating one's feelings. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, am I getting too close to home with this? If you wouldn't talk that way to your spouse, to your boss, to some, if there is one, political leader that you respect, then why would you talk to God that way? And if you don't think it has an effect on you spiritually, imagine the difference in presence of mind and the presence of time that you feel when you take the time to articulate, when you take the time to shape the words. Right? And partly some of the difficulty that has come about in the joke of the rabbi who mumbles and talks to God is born because of the fact that we have a much longer service than the rabbis of the Mishnah did. Right? So the rabbis of the Mishnah had a much shorter version of the service we now have. It did not take them 3 hours to get through a Saturday morning service, and therefore the impetus to rush was not there, at least not to the same degree. And we're going to even talk about some odd places to say the Shema. But let's move on.
It may not be rushing either, but by the time you said this twice a day for 10 years, 15 years, 20, over and over,
yes,
you might just go through because you already know it so well.
Absolutely right. And like a good cook who has mastered the art of cutting carrots, they probably don't have to line up the knife on every single cut in order to do it. They can do that, which terrifies the rest of us and looks like it's totally out of control, but absolutely it's in control. And if you can say the Shema and its attendant blessings in that way, hareze meshubach, that's wonderful. That's wonderful, but you need to be sure you have that same level of control as the chef does with the knife, so you don't slip and cut yourself verbally. All right, a little more.
Number 3, if he recites it out of order, he has not fulfilled his obligation.
Remember we talked about the 3 different pieces. You have the Shema, the Ve'ahavta. You have the next paragraph, that's the big long one about the fulfillment. And then you have the 3rd paragraph about the tzitzit and finishing with bringing us out of Egypt. If you rearrange those paragraphs, you're not Yotze. You have not fulfilled your obligation.
And I could see how that would happen. We wouldn't rearrange it because we're reading it from a prayer book. But if you don't have a book and you're just doing it out of your head, I could see how you might say the prayer in the wrong order sometimes.
Pre-printing press, very real issue. And having the presence of mind and focus to make sure you don't do that was a very big concern. They wanted to make sure that people were completely attentive to the details of what they were doing. It wasn't just, whatever, I don't remember which one it was. That it was, okay, this one. The Shema one is usually easy to start with, but it's, there's other 2. There are parts that overlap even. It gets a little confusing. Okay, and last.
Number 4, if he recites it and makes a mistake, he goes back to the place where he made the mistake.
Right? And there's our leniency. Right? You might think, or maybe not, because we're in the modern world, that if you make a mistake, it's okay. I mean, you did your best. You just keep going and you're fine. But making a mistake means you need to fix it. And you might have thought if you were going to be super strict that you made a mistake, you have invalidated the entire Shema, that is to say from the Shema all the way through to Elohechem, to, I am the Lord your God, and therefore all the way back to the beginning, do it over, right? If you make one mistake, the whole thing gets crumpled up and the teacher throws it in the trash can, do your essay over again. No, if you do a mistake, go back, fix it, carry on from that point. And that's a leniency, because like I said, we might have just tossed the whole recitation out and made you do it from scratch. So God's not that strict. Yes? No? Maybe? Okay, let's move on.
Where are we going now?
Chapter 2, Mishnah 4.
Mishnah 4. Okay. And that would be Mishnah on the other side of that. It says Mishnah 3. It says chapter 2, Mishnah 4 up here, and here it says Mishnah 3. Is that what you want me to say?
Yes, it does.
That's why I got confused.
You're absolutely right. That should say Mishnah 4 there. So yes,
Is correct.
the Mishnah number, the chapter 2, Mishnah 4 heading is correct, and the Mishnah is Mishnah 4.
4. Workers may recite the Shema on the top of a tree or the top of a scaffolding. that which they are not allowed to do in the case of the tefillah.
All right, so first vocab lesson, the tefillah, ha tefillah. What are we talking about? The Amidah, right? The Shachrit Amidah or the Mariv Amidah, because that's the only times we also say the Shema. You can't do those when you're in a tree. And I know this sounds a little bit like a Dr. Seuss book, right? Would you in a tree? Would you on a scaffold? Would you on a boat? Would you? I will not. I would not. But the Shema you can, right? So you're a worker. You're up some tree, gathering fruit, trimming the tree, getting firewood, whatever people do up in trees. And it is time for the Shema. Do you have to get out of the tree, come all the way down, do the Shema, get back in the tree, go all the way back up to continue your work? Or can you just do the Shema where you are? What does the Mishnah say?
Where you are.
Where you are. But the Amidah, no. The Amidah, you would have to leave the tree. Or scaffolding. Remember, they didn't exactly have those security state steps. Yeah, you take 3 steps back. But partly it is because of that issue, right? What is the posture for the Amidah? Standing, right? What is the posture for the Shema? This is an earlier Mishnah that we did a little while ago.
Right. So you have to be standing by the way, walking, whatever.
Whatever. Exactly, right? There are recommendations of how to do it, and there's a little back and forth about whether you should be standing or whether you should be lying down at different times or rising to try and match the words of the Ve'ahavta. But ultimately what it comes down to is if you're seated, you stay seated. And you shouldn't go out of your way to stand, and you definitely shouldn't go out of your way to lay down on the ground. But where you are is good for saying the Shema. And as long as you have it in the right time, you don't have to be in the right posture of lying down or rising up while you're reciting it. And therefore, you can say the Shema anywhere. The Amidah, you have to be standing. And if you're standing in a tree, that is a considerably different problem. Sitting in a tree to concentrate and say the Shema, I suppose for people that are, good tree climbers, that's not so bad. People can sleep in trees. But standing in a tree and concentrating, you're on shakier ground.
So to speak.
Yeah. I don't want to go out on a limb, but sorry.
When you say the Shema, shortly thereafter you're going to have to say the Amidah anyway. They come together.
Yes, they do now.
Oh, they didn't then.
Well, they did by recommendation, but they didn't by requirement. Right? So now we have the lovely blessing of the printed prayer book, right? And when we get to, for example, the end of Shacharit, right? When we finish the last blessing of the morning service, where am I? That goes along with too many Amidot in this Siddur. It's confusing of which one I'm looking at. Back it up. More, that's the Regalim. How do I keep missing it? Just trying to make a simple point. When we get to the last blessing after the Amidah, right? Al Yisrael, technically at that point we have finished a discrete unit of the service. That is the Shema and her blessings. Right, we talked about it last week. There was a blessing before regarding creation. There was a blessing before regarding Revelation and Torah. Then you have the Shema and all of its paragraphs. And then you have one more blessing that has to do with redemption. Right? So it's blessing, blessing, Shema, blessing, unit is done. And then you're also supposed to, in the morning, do the morning Amidah. It is considered ideal to link the unit of blessings for the Shema and the unit of the Amidah. And our prayer book does that beautifully, right? You just turn the page and it's right there. So why would you delay? Well, you might delay because, and we haven't got into the details of the Amidah's timing yet, but the window for the Shema and the window for the Amidah, there's time when you could be saying the Shema that you wouldn't necessarily be saying the Amidah yet. So you might get up early, say the Shema, head out on your way to work, have to stop along the way, or when you get to work, do the Amidah and then continue with your day. And that would have made them broken up. The rabbis very strongly recommend that the two go together, and that there are very good spiritual reasons because of the themes and how they move us from the Shema and her blessings to be in the proper position in order to do the Amidah well. But technically, again, going back to our question of minimums, technically they could be discrete elements. And therefore, you might end up in a situation where you're in a tree and it's time to say the Shema. And so you say the Shema, and you can wait a bit longer before you do the Amidah. And so you finish your work in the tree, climb down, and then you do the Amidah. And that works just fine. Okay? All right. There's also some supposition by some of the commentary that the Amidah wasn't a fixed printed text. The main themes of each of the blessings, the 18/19 blessings, were outlined and established as important themes. The taglines, what we call the Chatimot, the Baruch Atah Adonai lines that conclude each of the blessings, were probably set very early on. But the content of each blessing, the theme was set, but the wording was often up to the individual who was praying. We have many, many records of this from the Talmud and other discussions of prayer, where the person is extemporizing, not improvising because they've got guidelines, but they are coming up with the words as they go. And sometimes they do a great job and sometimes they do a bad job, and we get lots of commentary and discussion about good and bad in this. But it's clear that a lot of it is improvisational within that guideline. If you're trying to improvise standing on a limb, that takes a different type of creative intent and focus than reciting biblical passages, which you do not improvise in. Right? No one makes up the Ve'ahavta as they go. That is a quote, that is a set piece of text. You are doing that straight as we've got it in the Torah. So it may take all of our intent and focus to do it right, but we're not coming up with the words as we go. And so doing it while sitting on a tree branch may work out just fine. But standing and coming up with the whole words for all the Amidah, you get on the ground. Okay.
Rabbi,
Yes.
is there an obligation not to say the Shema, let's say, in a dirty room, like bathroom or something like that?
If you are trapped in a room for the entire window of time that you are supposed to say the Shema, and the room is filled with piles of used diapers, particularly horrible image, then yes, you are, under those circumstances, you have not done something wrong by avoiding reciting the Shema under those circumstances. Better to get out of the room and be able to say the Shema as well as a Shechianu for having air. But yes, so there are obligations, and we'll see more of those later, about what sort of space one should pray in. And we'll talk about both minimal as well as ideal. But if circumstances beyond your control prevent you from being able to say the Shema, you're tied and gagged, then it's not as though you're in trouble. And circumstances beyond our control, thank you for the segue, is going to lead us to the next Mishnah. So now we are on chapter 2, Mishnah 5. And this one is properly labeled. Yay!
Yay. And like what we're talking about is your intention when you're saying it.
We're going to come all down to intention in this one.
Yes. Okay. Part 1, a bridegroom is exempt from reciting the Shema on the first night until the end of Shabbat if he has not performed the act.
All right. That's a euphemism.
Okay.
Okay. Performing the act. I'm not drawing a diagram of that, right? Because we want to keep this at least a PG program. Why would he be exempt from saying the Shema under these circumstances?
Yeah, his mind might not be on it.
His mind might not be on it. It might be on a different mitzvah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But this, he'd just be doing it by rote. He wouldn't even know what he was saying. He would just go.
And precisely right. So this is bringing us back to this question of where are you when you're saying it? If you are in hopeful anticipation of celebrating the love you have with your bride, because you have just gotten married and now is the first opportunity to do so, you're unlikely to be able to summon the concentration and focus to say the Shema. Now you may notice here the passion that a person should have for their spouse should be more overwhelming than sitting on a tree branch, right? Sitting on a tree branch, you should be able to concentrate. Being with someone you love for the first time should be so more overwhelming than dangling from a tree. Right? That's no one should say that the Mishnah isn't romantic. So the bridegroom can focus. We'll talk later, by the way, in chapter 3 about the bride's issues, about where she's supposed to be saying this or not. But for the moment, chapter 2, we're going to talk about the groom. He can't focus enough to do it. But,
of course, it's a but. Number 2, it happened with Rabban Gamliel, who recited the Shema on the first night after he had married.
Okay, we do what?
His,
Wait, didn't we just say
yeah,
that you are exempt from reciting the Shema if you've just gotten married? Rabban Gamliel, major macher of the day, he did. Well, what's that word exempt mean? Right? Does exempt mean that you shouldn't do it? Or does exempt mean you don't have to do it? You're free not to do it, which means I'm also free to do it?
I guess so.
Okay, so to go back, I need a bigger board that I can just keep sliding things and rolling them back. So to go back to our original, point 0, if I am normally here and have to do the act to bring myself up to 0, if I'm exempt, this is cleared and I'm already at 0 automatically. And if I want, I can say it as well. That would seem to be what exempt means. Except, are we doing any favor to God and to ourselves spiritually by forcing ourselves to try and recite something when the reason we're exempt is precisely because we are unlikely to have the concentration and focus that goes along with the act? It's like, so you're exempt from having to write the essay, but you choose to write the essay anyway, even though you are horribly distracted and unfocused. Is the teacher really going to say, wow, that's so good that you turned in this terrible essay that you wrote without proofreading it or thinking about what you were doing because you were so distracted, and even though I told you didn't have to write it because I knew you were dealing with a difficult time in your family or whatever, I'm so glad you wrote this piece of trash. I mean, would we be praised for saying, oh, no, I know I don't have to, but I'm going to do it anyway and just do a bad job? Yeah, and Rabban Gamliel's doing it. I mean, presumably, he shouldn't be if he can't do it right. But
So his students said to him, "Our master, have you not taught us that a bridegroom is exempt from reciting the Shema?" He replied to them, "I will not listen to you to remove myself from the kingship of heaven even for a moment."
Malchut Shamayim, the kingship of heaven, which is a major theme of the Shema, I can't go without acknowledging and reminding myself of it through the recitation of the Shema. It would be more distracting to me to not do it than to do it. So imagine you're one of his students and you get married a month later. What should you do?
Go with the Rabbi Gamliel.
Which means
Do the Shema.
do the Shema.
Yeah.
Even if you can't focus on it, you're really thinking about something entirely different.
Yeah, but you're not Rabban Gamliel.
Yeah.
Maybe he can't remove the Malchut Shamayim for the moment, but you're thinking about your bride more than the spiritual heaven. It's.
I think what it is the kavanah.
Mm-hmm.
If you decide to do the Shema, you should do it and remove any thoughts from your head
Mm-hmm.
and just do the Shema with kavanah.
Right? And if you can't, but you've seen someone else whom you respect who can, do you emulate? Well, try harder. But so do you emulate their actions and fail, or do you accept the minimum and say, I won't, because Torah has already allowed me not to?
But you're right.
That's the problem also. Where does it say in the Torah that you exempt in the first night of the marriage?
Well,
Right.
Where does it say?
So where does it say in the Torah that you're
rabbinical.
right? Well,
No.
it's not exactly rabbinical. So the Shema is fulfilled. Again, remember we're talking about our Yotze issue here. It's fulfilled when you've done it properly. If you cannot do it properly, then there is no expectation of you. Right? Think, for example, of a child who or somebody who is Jewish who has never learned the Shema. Right? They were raised in a completely secular background. They have no idea how to say the Shema, and for 30 years of their life they've never said the Shema. Are they in debt up to their ears because they've never said it? No. According to Judaism, if they've never learned of the commandment, they've never learned how to perform the commandment, they are not penalized for having never done it. Once they learn, then they're on the hook. Then they're now capable, so they should be performing it. If you're incapable, we don't ding you for being incapable. It's for mitzvot after mitzvah after mitzvah. If you're incapable, for the positive ones, I should point out, the negative ones is like, I was incapable of not strangling him. That doesn't work in the court. But for the positive ones, if there is an act that is a condition that is preventing you, actually preventing, not just, oh, I didn't feel like it, then you are exempt at that moment. But the question is, and the difficult psychological problem is, but if you see people who do you follow their example even though you're incapable of living up to it at that moment? And is that good or bad to mirror? And this is a real issue within a community, because within a community, many people seek not to understand the law. One of the reasons we're having this Mishnah class, but they seek to emulate the norms of their surrounding because they want to belong to the group more than they're interested in fulfilling the spiritual act of the commandment. Because they don't want to look out. They don't want to be let's imagine that all of his students work really hard so that when it comes time for their wedding night, they can ignore their bride, not recommended, and be able to do the Shema. What about the one poor guy who legitimately can't do that? What's he going to say to the guys after the honeymoon?
But a guy has to be a nervous wreck. He's never done this particular act before. The woman, he probably only saw her one time before. She's waiting for another. He's doing something he doesn't even know what he's about to do. How can he possibly concentrate on the Shema when he's as nervous as this guy must be?
Yeah, but all the other guys said they did. It's like the weirdest, exactly. It's the weirdest reverse locker room talk you've ever seen.
Yeah.
Well, on my wedding night, I could say the Shema with no problem. What? What? And everyone else is thinking that the other guys in the locker room, or Beta Midrash, are right, that they must have actually been able to not think about what they were doing in this weird sort of one-upsmanship. And that creates a social and emotional stress on people. The Mishnah is meant to ground us, to say, yes, there are some people that will do this, but that is not the norm. What is the norm is what is actually expected of us. There may be some ideals, and we're going to come back to this in a bit about whether this is an ideal that we strive for, and you can still get into the one-upsmanship on that issue. But generally speaking, the Mishnah is more concerned with what are the real expectations so that we can live up to that. And then if you exceed expectations, you'll know that you have accomplished something beyond what was expected of you, and you'll know that you can feel good. And that's an important part. Okay, so we're gonna see that Rabban Gamliel, come on, turn the page, is unusual in more than one respect. So this is our first deviation of the type, but it happens in the Mishnah fairly regularly, which is having mentioned one type of a story or one type of a law or one particular rabbi, we then get a quick succession of a few things that relate to that same guy or that same topic. And it's completely off topic from the main category of study, but it came to mind. As long as we're talking about Rabban Gamliel doing things different than other people, hold on, let me tell you about this other time. And it helps the memorization and the organization, because these are things that don't exactly fit in everywhere. And they fit in nicely thematically here, but it's going to sound like, what in the world are we talking about this for? It's just an organizational aid for memorizing. So we're on chapter 2, Mishnah 6.
Rabban Gamliel bathed on the first night after the death of his wife.
That's a big no-no, right? Generally speaking, you do not bathe during the Shiva period, right? Because you are in mourning, you are grieving. And again, remember, this is in the ancient world. It wasn't like people had showers and were bathing constantly anyway, but most people would bathe, at least once a week, if not a little bit more often. But he's like bathing immediately. What are you doing?
His disciples said to him, Master, have you not taught us that a mourner is forbidden to bathe? He replied to them, I am not like other men. I am very delicate.
All right. Again, very reversed from what often macho men would be trying to brag about. I can't even go a day without showering. Okay.
Wow.
So does that mean it's okay to break halakha if you're delicate? It's a bit unusual.
Yes.
Yes. And maybe not the way we normally think about establishing, Daniel.
Well, I mean, mourning is hard enough without punishing ourselves. Maybe that's what he's saying. It's just like, why? I'm already in mourning, and why do I have to make things harder on myself?
Because for myself, this would be an undue hardship. For someone else, waiting a week to bathe, that may be no big deal to them. And it may be perfectly in keeping with them. That may allow them to concentrate better on mourning because they're not primping and preening and cleaning and doing whatnot. And for them, that works really, really well. But for me, if I don't bathe, it's either going to be significantly unhealthy for me, or it's going to create a distraction for me that I'll be then unable to give my attention to the mourning that I would like to do. So therefore, I get to change the law.
I don't like that. I got to tell you, for me, Shabbat is a day of rest. It's just very boring, and I miss all the things that I want to be doing. And so for me, I'm going to change the law because I'm very active. And so I really need, in order to focus on God, I need to be able to turn on my television and answer my phones. I'm not going to obey the law.
Okay. So this is where we are going to end up with something that is drowned out by the din of history, but is very present within the original layers of teachings from our sages, which is, as long as you're in here, you're okay. That is to say, when it comes to performing a mitzvah or fulfilling an obligation, there is often a spectrum of acceptable. There is often room for individual application, interpretation, and fulfillment, that it may be that this is best, this narrow band right here. This might be absolutely, this is the best thing you should be doing. And if everybody had exactly the right life situation and the right personality and the right psychology and the right bank account, that everyone would be right here. But really, as long as you're between the lines, you're yotze, you have fulfilled your obligation. This gets drowned out in history as in the modern times, actually, just in the last few hundred years, especially, as communities become more and more exacting in order to keep people, as the reform movement begins to develop. And by the way, again, the historical reform movement is very different than the modern reform movement, but historically, you had a very wide pattern of behavior that was developing in Europe. And people said, look, if we're letting people have this much variation, look what they're doing with it. We need to narrow the band in order to keep people on the straight and narrow. So we're going to just keep making it a tighter and tighter focus on what is acceptable. And even though the law says this is acceptable, under our circumstances, when people are taking such liberties, we're going to say only this is acceptable. It's a zero tolerance policy in the face of too much, it was felt, freedom being taken. And that's created a false image. And what we see right here in the very beginning of Mishnah, this very first section of Mishnah, and almost at the very beginning of Mishnah, is that there is a spectrum of acceptable. And Rabban Gamliel is saying, yes, this would be ideal. under most circumstances. But for me, I can still be within the law, on the very edge of what is appropriate. Because of my unique set of circumstances, I can still do this. But that doesn't mean everyone should follow me. That doesn't mean my example should become the new best that everyone is having to mimic 100%. It just means that for me, this works because it's still just within the law of what is acceptable. Stay where you are, try and hew to the best and most ideal, but I'm not outside it, and I'm also not the leader that you have to now copy 100%. And that's really, really complicated and really nuanced, very hard to follow. And you know what? It forces us to have to continue to think about what we're doing, which is the point, right? That's the point. We're not supposed to just set our car on cruise control because that's what the speed limit says. We're supposed to be watching the traffic so that we notice sometimes we have to slow down, and sometimes you actually have to punch it to avoid an accident. Sometimes you have to go a little bit over the speed limit in order to keep from, when the guy starts pulling out, you need to lunge to get around him before he hits you because you're not going to stop with your brakes. That's appropriate under that circumstance. You need to be watching the road and understand that there is some room for flexibility. And just because you lunge once doesn't mean the speed limit is now 80 miles an hour. Okay. Little more Rabban Gamliel story.
Mishnah 7. When Tavi, his Rabbi Gamliel's slave, died, he accepted condolences for him.
All right, let me make sure we understand the image here. Right? Rabban Gamliel had a slave. It's generally thought that he was probably a Canaanite slave. That means to say he was a non-Jewish slave. And in many other stories throughout the Mishnah and the Talmud, Tavi is shown to be a very wise and very perceptive man. He gives advice and clarity to Rabban Gamliel in many cases, and often outshines Rabban Gamliel's students. It's kind of like, the serving guy knows more than the students. And when he dies, people come to Rabban Gamliel and offer their condolences. Baruch Dayan Ha'amet, may God comfort you among all who mourn in Zion and Jerusalem. And he accepts the condolence. He doesn't say, no. He was just my slave. You don't need to offer me condolences. He accepts their condolences, which basically means that he is in mourning for this person, which is kind of unprecedented in this category in this time. So it's very odd. Again, and his students come to him and say, Master.
Yeah, Master, have you not taught us that one does not accept condolences for slaves? He replied to them, my slave Tavi was not like other slaves. He was a fit man. Right,
so yes, there may be a stereotype of what slaves are like. And given the economic reality of the ancient world, if I were a slave, I probably would have also been as shiftless as I could possibly get away with, because there were limits on how a master could treat a slave. And obviously you wouldn't want to be a slave, so why not do that? Tavi wasn't like that. Tavi was a good man. And Rabban Gamliel says, therefore, it is fitting to mourn his passing. Right? He is kasher. That's the word that's used here when it says he is fit. That he was kasher. It is appropriate to mourn for him because he was a good man. And the stereotype that you're used to didn't apply to him. So sometimes there are exceptions. And when there are exceptions, they have to be acknowledged, not ignored or hidden. Make sense? Maybe? All right, we're almost there to the end of the chapter. So I said before that we would come back to this bridegroom issue. And now that we've finished with our vignettes of Rabban Gamliel being different than everyone else, now we're coming back to the bridegroom.
To Mishnah 8, if a bridegroom wants to recite the Shema on the first night of his marriage, he may do so. Okay, so remember what we had said earlier? What was the phrase that was used? Exempt, right? Now he is permitted, right? Which is a different formulation, right? First he was exempt, now he is permitted. So which means that there was an argument, as we had discussed. Does exempt mean I can do it if I want, or does exempt mean I shouldn't be doing it? And here the idea is you can do it. You may do so, which is
a little bit more encouraging perhaps to do it than not. However,
Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, not everyone who desires to take up the name of God may do so.
all right, who was Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel? Just deconstruct his name.
Yeah.
Shimon ben Gamliel.
He's the son.
Ah,
He's the son of Rabban Gamliel, right? So the guy we began the discussion about the bridegroom with, who said, I couldn't live without the kingdom of heaven. His son is saying, yeah, but not everyone can live up to that. Which means that, yes, you may be able to do this, but don't kid yourself. And even if you wished you could be that pious, even if you wished you lived in that spiritual realm, that you couldn't detach yourself for even a night because of your marriage and all that meant, even if you wish that was you, if it's not you, just don't say the Shema, right? Acknowledge who you are. And again, you got to imagine growing up in the shadow of Rabban Gamliel. This is a kid, now a man and a rabbi, who probably knows what it's like not being able to live up to some of the expectations that are around him of the example that his father set. And he gets it. And he gets that it's not just a question of do it if you can, because he knows if you say to people, do it if you can, everyone's going to say, I can do it, because they don't want to be the guy who says I can't. Because if you measure the success within the community by your piety, by your performance and execution of the mitzvot, everyone is going to want to earn the community's praise, of how good a person you are, by doing more than they really are, by doing more than they're really ready for. It's like, go to a gym with a bunch of friends and see whether or not when they're at the bench press, whether or not every guy puts a little more weight on the barbell, right? Because if the last guy lifted 50 pounds, the next guy is going to lift 60 pounds. And if the one guy lifts 60 pounds, the next guy is going to lift 70 pounds. And eventually someone's going to hurt himself. If they each go alone, they'll probably lift whatever they should lift. But when there's a sense of, not just competition, but how can I earn the respect and admiration of others? It doesn't have to be I'm better than you. It's I want you to praise me and think that I am worthwhile and good by whatever standard we're measuring our community by. If it's lifting weights, people are going to keep pushing themselves if they're in view of each other until someone gets hurt. If it is money, people will continue to try and get a little extra, either by working too hard or by illegal means. And again, someone's going to get hurt. And if it is by measuring piety, if you don't continue to remind people that there may be an ideal, but the rules are still here and it's okay to be here, people are going to continue pushing for that limit, and eventually they're going to get hurt. And when they get hurt, it will often take, when someone hurts themselves on spiritual overreach, it will often take a lot more to heal than just pulling your shoulder when you're trying to lift more than you should. And so they are very, very clear saying, no, there really is a range of okay. And you're not less of a man. And we're going to come back to the whole man-woman thing in the next chapter. By lifting this much. That's all that was asked. It was come and do one repetition, one lift, and you're done. Whatever you can lift within, not 2 pounds is okay. But don't think you're more of a man because you lifted 100. You're more of a man, and I really am emphasizing that gender language because of chapter 3. You're more of a man because you chose to lift, because you were trying to fulfill your obligation at all, and recognizing that the obligation that God has for you is different than the obligation you may want to put on yourself, and it may be different than the obligation you think others are putting on you. It's not. It's you and God, and trust me, God is the best partner you want when you're lifting, because God is not going to keep putting more weight on that bar, right? God says, all I want you to do is lift this, and really this is not much. Make sense? And that brings us to the end of chapter 2. Any more questions? Okay. Next week, same bad time, same bad channel. And remember, anybody who wants a copy of this exact text, I'm happy to send you the doc file. But you can also find a good English translation on Sefaria.org. Wonderful website that should already be bookmarked in your browsers anyway. They have not just Mishnah, but all sorts of Jewish texts. You can also find a very nice translation with occasional commentary in English on Wikimedia, which is the text and media site that's connected to Wikipedia. And they have many very good, often spotty because it is crowdsourced, translations of text. So not every page is translated of every text, but you can find a lot of things on that site as well. Many big chunks of Shulchan Aruch, lots of Mishnah Torah, and of course, Mishnah. So check it out. There's no reason not to be learning, is what I'm trying to say.
It was your